Anime Vanguards just dropped update 13.5, and honestly, this one feels like a full-on summer explosion of content. Coming right after the Godly Ascension update 13, Eternal Adversaries brings in 6 brand new units, a refreshed summer event with zombie survival vibes, 7 Vanguard familiars, new Memoria, and even a full event pass system. On top of that, there's a brand new event currency called Iced Tea that you'll be grinding across different modes to unlock rewards. But the real spotlight is definitely on the summer banner and the today's strongest versus history's strongest unit, aka Gojo versus Sukuna. This isn't just another unit drop, it feels like the main attraction of the entire update. Between that, the returning summer game mode, and all the new progression systems, update 13.5 is basically pushing you straight into a chaotic summer war where grinding, banners, and meta units all collide at once. I'm quickly moving on to the video and I'm ranking units in Anime Vanguards. Before we start, if you enjoy these types of list videos, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Enjoy watching. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Igros Elite Knight, Ice Manipulator, Admi, Company Captain Haibu, Armored Mage Requip, and Astolfo Rider of Blah. Some units in Anime Vanguards look like they are about to dominate the battlefield, until the late waves politely remind them who is actually in charge. Igros Elite Knight is basically your early game bodyguard who shows up, swings hard, and makes you feel safe for a while. His strong physical damage helps a lot in the opening waves, especially when everything is still manageable. But the moment enemies start grouping up and pressure increases, his lack of area damage starts to hurt him badly. He just cannot keep up when things get crowded, and later on he gets completely overshadowed by stronger shadow synergy units that do everything he does, but better and with more style. Astolfo Rider of Black is the kind of unit that feels like it should be doing more than it actually does. The mobility is genuinely useful, letting you reposition and react when things go wrong, almost like a tactical emergency button. The problem is that when you actually look at the damage numbers, it starts to feel a bit underwhelming compared to real damage dealers. In the end, Astolfo ends up being more of a utility helper than a core carry, which limits how much impact he can really have in most stages. Ice Manipulator Admiral tries to be that crowd control specialist everyone respects, and on the right map, it actually works. Slowing enemies in wide open areas can buy you a lot of breathing room, especially in earlier waves. But the issue is consistency. The crowd control is weaker than most dedicated support units, and if the map layout is not ideal, its usefulness drops fast. So you are basically gambling a bit on whether the stage design is going to let this unit shine or not. Company Captain Hybrid feels like a reliable early to mid game worker who just shows up and does his job without complaining. His physical damage stays stable for a while, which makes him comfortable to use when you are still building your setup. The problem is scaling. Once the game moves into later stages, his damage starts falling behind harder carries, and since he does not bring much utility to the table either, there is not much left to justify keeping him in the lineup. Armored Mage Requip sounds like it should be flashy, and to be fair, the idea is there. Every time she shifts position, she buffs her own damage, which feels like it should lead to some big moments. In practice though, the overall damage output just does not reach the level of stronger area of effect units. There are simply better options that deal more damage with less effort, so she ends up feeling a bit stylish but underpowered in actual performance. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Savior Moonless, Kogoro Unsealed, Rengoku Purgatory, Explosive Demon Bomb, Cursed Shinobi Black, Deceiver Monster, Horse Girls Racers, Quetzalcoatl Sun God, and Scrap Pirate Metal. When you start digging into the lower mid-tier units in Anime Vanguards, you quickly realize something funny. A lot of them are not bad, they are just stuck in the almost there but not quite zone. Savior Moonless actually gives you a pretty satisfying start with his range scaling. He can cover large sections of the map and keep steady area of effect pressure on incoming waves, which makes early and mid-game feel controlled. The issue is simple though. Once you unlock his Rebirth variant, there is almost no reason to look back. That upgraded version completely overshadows him in every meaningful way, leaving this one as a stepping stone you eventually abandon. Kogoro Unsealed is one of those units that looks very useful on paper because of his rapid multi-hit attacks. He is genuinely solid when you need to break shields or deal with armored enemies, and he fills that support damage role decently well. The problem is the cost. Upgrading him feels like paying a luxury price for a mid-tier performance, which makes his value drop sharply as the game progresses. Rengoku Purgatory is all about setup and precision. When you get enemies to walk through his attack path properly, the burn damage becomes surprisingly effective, especially in choke point heavy maps. He thrives in those controlled situations where enemies are forced to stay inside his damage zones. But outside of that perfect positioning, he struggles to justify his slot because missing that setup means losing most of his impact. Explosive Demon Bomb brings the kind of flashy burst damage that makes you think it might scale into something scary later on. And to be fair, with enough investment, it does start to perform well in group fights thanks to its large explosive attacks. The downside is the journey there. The mid-game progression is expensive and slow, so you spend a lot of time waiting before it actually feels worth the investment. Cursed Shinobi Black Flames focuses more on long fights and steady pressure. The Black Flame effects slowly chip away at enemy waves, which can feel helpful during extended battles. However, the inconsistency becomes a real issue, especially when dealing with bosses that simply move out of its effective range before the damage fully pays off. It is the kind of unit that feels like it is doing something useful, but rarely enough to change the outcome. Deceiver Monster is one of those early game lifesavers that helps you stabilize before things get serious. The summoned monsters provide extra bodies on the field, which buys time and helps stall enemy waves effectively. But as soon as the game transitions into late game content, the scaling drops off hard and it starts feeling like a temporary crutch rather than a long-term solution. Horse Girls races are built for speed and early economy control, and they do that job very well. Fast attacks and movement buffs make early waves feel almost trivial, which is great for setting up your economy. The problem is that once stronger units come online, they become one of the easiest replacements in the roster, since their late game scaling is extremely limited. Quetzalcoatl Sun God is actually quite specialized, and when it works, it really works. Its anti-air coverage is excellent and can shut down flying enemies completely, which makes certain stages much easier. It also provides decent burn damage over time. However, on maps where aerial enemies are rare or absent, a big part of its value disappears instantly, making it situational by design. Scrap Pirate Metal feels like the budget completion reward for the pirate synergy introduced in Update 13. It helps fill out early wave pressure without demanding heavy investment, which is nice when you are just starting a pirate-focused setup. But once stronger pirate or non-pirate carries enter the picture, its damage ceiling and utility are not enough to keep it relevant, so it naturally gets phased out. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Lord Friezo Emperor, Iskanor Pride, Pink Villain, Celesti, World Destroyer Old, Holoseph Pure, Okarun Turbo, Is Dead Romantic, Agony Shinobi Force, Student Enraged, Bounty Hunter King of Hell, Beast Pirate Half Dragon, and Cursed Dr. Healer. When you move into B tier in Anime Vanguards, the interesting thing is that most of these units are actually strong. They are just missing that final broken factor that separates good from meta-defining. Lord Friezo Emperor is a classic example of reliable consistency. His beam attacks keep steady pressure across large sections of the map, and that alone makes him useful in almost any stage. He does not fall off easily and can carry you through most of the game comfortably. The only real problem is that when you compare him to top tier carries, he lacks that explosive burst or special utility that would push him into elite territory. Iskanor Pride is the definition of high risk, high reward damage. When his timing lines up correctly, he can absolutely melt high health bosses in seconds, and his burn effects make grouped enemies suffer heavily over time. The catch is that he is very dependent on wave pacing. If you mismanage timing, his effectiveness drops noticeably, so he rewards skill but punishes inconsistency. Pink Villain, Celestial is one of those units that feels like a self-contained defense system. Her self-sustain allows her to hold lanes almost independently, which makes her incredibly comfortable to use in longer stages. She combines offense and survivability in a balanced way, but eventually, her damage scaling cannot keep up with late game carries, which is why she stays in the very solid but not top tier category. World Destroyer World is all about wave control rather than single target dominance. His wide shockwave attacks make early and mid game feel much easier by clearing large groups of weaker enemies quickly. However, once durable bosses start appearing, his lack of focused damage becomes a serious weakness, and he needs backup support to stay relevant. Holoseph Pure is a flexible unit that tries to do a bit of everything. Early on, his burst damage helps you stabilize quickly, and later he transitions into a more AoE-focused utility role. The issue is that while he is versatile, he does not truly excel in any single area compared to higher tier units, which keeps him from breaking into the top ranks. Akoran Turbo brings a fun transformation mechanic that lets him switch between boss damage and wave clearing. When fully utilized, his fast attack speeds keep constant pressure on enemies, making him feel very active in combat. But that flexibility comes at a cost, since you need to manage his modes carefully to get the most value out of him, and mistakes can reduce his overall efficiency. Is Dead Romantic focuses heavily on crowd control, with freezing and slowing effects that help manage enemy pushes. She is one of the more accessible control options in the game, which makes her a practical pick for many players. Still, her control strength is noticeably weaker compared to premium stall units, so she works best as a support layer rather than a core strategy. Agony Shinobi Force performs best in the mid-game, where his mix of AoE damage and crowd control can comfortably handle most waves. He is reliable and makes progression feel smooth during early and mid stages. The downside is his scaling, which drops significantly once stronger late-game units appear, causing him to lose relevance over time. Student Enraged is a burst specialist built around rage mechanics. When his rage is active and properly timed, he can delete bosses in very short windows, which feels extremely satisfying. However, if his rage uptime is not managed well, his performance becomes inconsistent, making him more situational than stable. Bounty Hunter King of Hell is a bit of a hybrid between combat and economy value. His burn and bleed stacking on enemies can create surprisingly strong damage over time, especially when combined with his wanted mechanic on burning targets. On top of that, his passive bonuses for boss bounty missions and rift shard gains make him extremely valuable in specific farming setups. Outside of those modes though, his combat performance alone is not enough to compete with higher tier units, making him very mode dependent. Beast Pirate Half Dragon fits neatly into rift-focused gameplay, especially for players already investing in pirate synergy setups. He performs well enough in mid-game waves and benefits from Elastic Captain Cog 5th's synergy buffs. Still, his rift-locked acquisition and average standalone damage keep him from becoming a universal pick in most team compositions. Cursed Dr. Healer is less about dealing damage and more about reshaping how your entire team performs. He cleanses status effects, boosts ally damage through flat bonuses, extends range, and even reduces cooldowns, which can significantly improve overall team efficiency. The downside is obvious though, he contributes no direct damage himself, so his value is completely dependent on how strong the units around him are. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right, Demon Hybrid Chainsaw, Demon Leader, Brawlzy Super Rafu, Conqueror vs Invulne, Savior Rebirth, Shinobi Sage Friends, Skele King Rock, Diablo Renascimiento, Diablo Requiem, Teacher Final Stand, Elastic Captain, Cog 5th, Lord Fairy, and Reaper Scissors. When you reach A tier in Anime Vanguards, the game basically starts showing you what properly built synergy actually looks like, and suddenly every unit feels like it has a purpose instead of just filling space. Demon Hybrid Chainsaw is one of those units that completely changes the tone of a match once his meter fills. Early on, he might feel manageable, but the moment that meter is online, he starts shredding both bosses and waves without hesitation. The bleed detonation mechanics are where things get really chaotic, turning clustered enemies into instant burst windows, and when paired with Demon Leader, the synergy gets a bit ridiculous, pushing his damage ceiling into territory where he feels almost unfair in long fights. Demon Leader herself is not just a support, she is a full system enabler. The early game cost reduction alone already makes your setup smoother, but the real value comes from how much she amplifies Demon Hybrid Chainsaw. In Demon Hunter compositions, she is almost not optional because the synergy between them is what turns a decent carry into a late game monster. She still contributes damage and utility on her own, but her identity is clearly built around enabling others to perform at their peak. Brawlzy Super Wrathful is what happens when a unit refuses to stay balanced. Every crit feeds into his own damage, and once he gets going, his AoE attacks start deleting crowded waves in seconds. Fully upgraded, he becomes one of those late game carries that can basically take over endless modes if you invest properly. The funny part is how quickly he goes from strong to why is everything gone already once his scaling kicks in. Conqueror vs Invulnerable fills a very specific but extremely valuable niche. His ability to break through enemy armor makes him a nightmare for tank-heavy, late-game enemies. On top of that, his hybrid damage style means he never really falls useless against any enemy type. Even when he is not securing kills, he is constantly softening bosses so your main carries can finish the job faster, which keeps him relevant in almost every stage of the game. Savior Rebirth is one of those high investment carries that immediately tells you where your late game power level stands. His burst damage scales extremely well, and his wide attack range lets him pressure multiple lanes at once. When fully developed, he becomes one of the most reliable answers to difficult late game waves, especially when everything starts overwhelming your defenses at once. Shinobi Sage Friendship is less about personal damage and more about making an entire team feel stronger. Shinobi units in particular benefit heavily from his synergy passives, which means your overall composition gets noticeably more efficient. His scaling also ensures that he does not fall off in longer matches, which is rare for support style units, making him one of the most important backbone pieces in Shinobi-focused builds. Skelly King Rock brings a very comfortable balance of utility and survivability. Freezing enemies while also boosting allies creates a defensive layer that stabilizes almost any lineup. He is not flashy, but his combination of buffs and control makes fights significantly easier to manage. In most compositions, he ends up being one of those units you just do not remove because everything feels worse without him. Diablo Renacimiento is where AoE scaling starts to feel truly dangerous. Grouped enemies become his playground, and once he ramps up, entire waves can disappear under consistent damage pressure. His map coverage also ensures that he is rarely idle, which keeps constant pressure on enemy movement. In mid to late game, he becomes one of the more reliable wave clear options available. Divalo Requiem plays a more tactical role, focusing on controlling enemy momentum while still delivering strong AoE damage. He can slow pushes just enough to give your carries breathing room, which is often more valuable than raw numbers. Even without relying purely on damage, his utility keeps him relevant in a wide range of situations, especially when fights become chaotic. Teacher Final Stand is built for those clutch moments where everything is about to fall apart. His strength spikes during critical situations, making him a reliable last line of defense unit. He is not meant to dominate the entire match, but rather to stabilize it when things go wrong, which makes him surprisingly valuable in difficult stages where timing matters more than raw power. Elastic Captain Cog 5th is where pirate synergy starts to feel like a real system. Wanted stacks steadily increase pirate ally damage, especially when positioned correctly near a repulse-heavy frontline. The ability to swap between Cog 4th and Cog 5th forms also gives him flexibility that most carries simply do not have. The only real downside is the investment requirement, since unlocking his full potential takes time through multiple evolution questlines. Lord Fairy is a control-heavy unit that turns crowd control into burst potential. Stone effects that stun enemies and amplify damage when broken early create very satisfying damage windows. The Sloth passive is also interesting, trading attack speed for massive damage and slow effects, which makes her feel like a deliberate, timing-based unit. The weakness is consistency, since anything immune to stun immediately reduces her effectiveness. Reaper Scissors is one of the more layered units in the roster, built around stacking bleed and triggering explosive follow-up effects. Once 4 stacks are reached, the damage spikes dramatically, especially with rupture and stun interactions added into the mix. The downside is the ramp-up time. Before those stacks are built, it feels noticeably slower, which makes him more dependent on setup compared to instant impact units. The units in this tier are, in order from top left to bottom right: Demon Leader Control, God Above Heaven, Song Jinwoo and Igros, Gujo Infinity, Lich King Ruler, Regita Super 4, Ice Queen Release, Elocard Vampire King, Today's Strongest versus History's Strongest, Raging Oni versus Wrath God and Envoy of Destruction. When you finally reach S tier in Anime Vanguards, the game stops feeling like build optimization and starts feeling like you are assembling completely different win conditions. Demon Leader Control is one of those units that quietly breaks the entire economy curve of the game. The chain-based passive alone changes how fast you can scale, because suddenly deployment costs stop being a real limitation. On top of that, the global damage boost for Demon Hunter allies turns already strong carries into endgame monsters. What makes her even more dangerous is that she is not just support, she still contributes meaningful damage while enabling your entire roster at the same time. God Above Heaven feels like the definition of stage control. His AoE burst damage can erase entire waves instantly, but the real power comes from his time stop mechanics that completely freeze enemy movement. That alone can reset bad situations and give your whole team breathing room. Add in status effect immunity, and you get a unit that not only deals damage, but also refuses to be disrupted, which is extremely valuable in late game chaos. Song Jinwoo and Igros operate more like a growing army than a single unit. The constant shadow summons create pressure across the entire map without taking up additional placement slots, which is huge for late game optimization. These shadows also act as an endless frontline, absorbing damage and holding space without requiring constant attention. The result is a self-sustaining system that gets stronger as the match drags on. Gujo Infinity Beatsao is all about control dominance. Wide area stuns and slows allow him to completely dictate how enemy waves move, and that alone gives your team a massive advantage. Even though he is primarily a control unit, his sustained damage still matters, especially in longer fights. Once his domain abilities come online, dangerous waves can be stopped before they even reach your defensive core. Lich King Ruler brings something different to the table, a near-permanent autonomous frontline. His summoned units create a shield that does not require micromanagement, which frees your resources for stronger damage dealers. The added bonuses he gains from resisting status effects or debuffs make him scale in a very unique way, allowing him to remain relevant while still acting as a defensive backbone. Rajita Super 4 is basically what happens when single target damage reaches its absolute limit. He is the ultimate boss killer, capable of melting high health enemies before they become a real threat. His explosion-based damage also gives him some wave-clearing ability, but his true identity is deleting priority targets as fast as they appear. In any setup where bosses matter, he instantly becomes one of the most important pieces. Ice Queen Release specializes in freezing entire enemy pushes and turning fast waves into slow-moving targets. Her area of effect freeze effects can lock down large groups for extended periods, which creates huge synergy opportunities for slower but high damage carries. She is especially effective against fast-moving enemies that would normally overwhelm defenses, since she simply removes their ability to advance. Alucard Vampire King is built around sustained pressure across multiple lanes. His stacking bleed effects scale incredibly well over time, allowing him to steadily melt enemies without needing constant repositioning. The consistency of his damage makes him reliable in long matches, where maintaining pressure is more important than burst timing. He is not flashy, but he is extremely efficient. Today's strongest versus history's strongest is one of the most complex scaling units in the entire roster. Every other attack dealing bonus damage and bypassing damage reduction makes it naturally strong against heavily armored enemies. Its bleed and dismantle loops create a self-scaling system that gets stronger as enemies die, while immunity-based damage boosts make it even more dangerous in status-heavy stages. The only real weakness is the early wave phase, where it needs time to ramp before reaching full potential. Raging Oni versus Wrath God is a pure burst-focused powerhouse designed around timing and precision. Its X-focus mechanic turns stored meter into massive single-hit damage, while Grey health conversion adds another layer of delayed power. Rage scaling rewards careful placement, especially at choke points where enemies are forced to stay in range. However, its focus on single target burst means it is less effective when dealing with large scattered waves. Envoy of Destruction. Resistance plays more like a global amplifier than a traditional damage unit. The destruction effect weakens enemy defenses, so the entire team benefits, especially against tanky or shielded targets. Its scaling through flame stacks and buff interactions makes it stronger in coordinated setups, and the fact that it is obtainable through the event pass makes it one of the most accessible S-tier value units. The only drawback is its slow solo ramp, which means it performs best when supported rather than alone. The video ends here. See you in another video. Don't forget to subscribe.